Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's WEConnect International webinar. My name is Maggie Berry, and I'm the Executive Director for WEConnect International here in Europe, and I'm delighted that you've joined us for this afternoon's webinar, 5 Cultural Keys to Building Sustainable Engagement and Purpose. This session is being presented by Karin Volo, CEO of Evoloshen, WEConnect International Women-Owned Business, and an expert in engagement, personal and organisational development, as well as being an international bestseller. So I'm delighted she's with us today. In today's webinar, Karen's going to be offering us insights as to why working with engagement is essential to building a sustainable business into the future. And she's going to share some case studies with us from some of the most amazing companies in the world about how they drive purpose and meaning to engage their employees. As always, to keep background noise to minimum, I'm going to ask participants to be on mute, so please use the chat functionality to ask any questions you might have, and there'll be time for discussion and questions at the end. Karen's probably going to talk for about 40 to 45 minutes, and the session is being recorded, so you will be able to listen back to it again. So Karen, thank you so much for presenting for us today. I'm going to pass the presenter rights over to you so that we can start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maggie, and I'm just honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me along, and welcome to everybody who's taking your time out of your very busy days. Depending on where you are in the world, maybe this is a little lunch and learn session, but I'm happy to share with my knowledge and expertise when it comes to building an amazing culture through engagement and purpose. So, let me just go ahead and get started, and I will say, as Maggie mentioned, that we'll take questions towards the end. And if you do have any questions that pop up, you can write them down in the chat box, and then Maggie will be able to throw them at me when I'm done presenting on this. So let's get started. So a company that I run is called Evoloshen, and we really believe that there's a new way of doing business that's emerging. And I'm going to share with you a lot of these different things. Maggie did a wonderful introduction. Just to tell you a little bit more, I do have a company called Evoloshen and also Evoloshen Academy, where we're a corporate training company. And it's interesting because we're going to talk quite a bit about the book Engage today, but when you write a book, it opens doors you don't even know even existed. So it's been quite exciting for me because I've been asked after having written this book to be involved in as an expert judge on Employee Engagement Awards with 2 different organizations throughout Europe and North America. And it's been really insightful for me because besides the work that I do with companies, it's given me a platform where I can really look at a lot of different companies to see how they're working with engagement. So I do a lot of inspirational speaking. My areas of expertise are engagement, purpose, and trust, basically. And I'll share a little bit at the end as we're talking about trust that I'm also a certified CIQ coach, which means a conversational intelligence coach. And there's a lot of great information that's come from that. So that's just a little bit about my background, and then Evoloshen specifically, the company that I'm running, is our purpose is bringing joy to the workplace. And if you think about it, the majority of us spend the bulk of our time at work. And unfortunately, there are so many people that are quite unhappy at work or not really engaged or, reaching their full potential. And so we see our mission here as helping companies to bridge over to taking organizations into this new way of thinking. And it's based on models that I'll talk about with companies that we've looked at, amazing companies. And this whole process really helps to increase the trust inside of the organization as well as externally to the market. It raises the confidence for all the stakeholders that are involved. It helps when you do this type of work really accelerating the productivity, and it helps to unify the communications both internally and externally. And really, quite honestly, I'll say it doesn't matter the size of the company. We work with small to large enterprise organizations. And the foundational stuff that I'll share with you today is really it's something that you can apply anywhere. So we really do believe in igniting that passion that already exists inside of your employees. And our trainings basically are designed on a 2-level basis where we work with the individual, but then also that gives benefits to the whole organization as well. And I'll talk about this a little bit at the end on how you can take it further in terms of getting certified in cultural engagement. So that's one of our key trainings. But our trainings have been pre-approved also from 2 of the largest HR organizations as well. So this whole journey started for my husband and partner and I when we wrote this book called Engage. And Our background really professionally is, for years I'd worked in executive search. I will say just personally, I'm half Swedish, half American, so I am based now living in Stockholm. And I've worked in, 2 different continents basically with companies for the majority of my working career. And I've always helped people and individuals going through transitions. And as I mentioned earlier, so many people are unhappy at work. And we just started to look at all these global trends that are really impacting business today, and it's affecting everybody globally. So we're all kind of on the same boat, trying to figure out what's happening with all these different things that are affecting our businesses, right? And as we started to do research into some of these companies that just started to land on our radar, they were very open and sharing. And we discovered a formula that they all kind of had in common about this new way of doing business. And that's really kind of the basis of everything we're going to talk about today, but also the work that we do with our company. So when I was writing this book, it was kind of funny because I did not find a definition for engage that I really felt encapsulated what we wanted it to mean. So I thought, well, we're writing a book on engage. Why don't we go ahead and make our own definition of it as well? So our definition of engage is basically to have full attention, commitment, enthusiasm, passion, and purpose for your work, and really to be wholeheartedly involved in and to be able to contribute positively to the whole organization. And it's really about stepping into your full potential to be the best version of yourself at work. And like I said earlier, we're all spending the bulk of our time at work. And why shouldn't we do our best and be our best there? And why shouldn't employers create an environment and culture where people can step into that? And that's really where you have a high productive organization or high productive culture. So we'll talk about the foundations as to how you can work with that. So when we wrote the book, it ended up that certain companies were landing on our radar. And this was back in 2011 and 12, basically. The book Engage came out in late 2013. And these companies were landing on our radar, and it was like everyone else out in the business world was struggling. They were laying off. They were trying to, it was really tough times for a lot of people out there. But then there were these few companies that they seemed to be doing something different because their employees loved their work, their customers loved them. They just seemed to have a lot of energy, and they were able to, have top talent working there. And so a lot of these companies, you'll recognize their name. We've got Virgin and Ben & Jerry's, right, and Patagonia and Puma. And then we started to look at companies that might have been, or that were in different industries and different geographical regions and different ownership structures to see, is it working in this location? Is it working in this type of a company? So John Lewis, for example, is an employee-owned company. HCL is a large international Indian-based IT services provider. And so it's very interesting to see that we really did find these common points that we'll be talking about here in just a minute as to what they were doing that was different from everybody else that was really making their businesses thrive. And as I mentioned, this applies to any size organization. It really is the foundational model of or foundational way of building an amazing culture and an amazing company. So our research took us into all sorts of different studies, and we looked at, major reports coming out. And I continue now to stay on top of this as well because I'm fascinated by the trends of what's happening out there. So let me tell you a little bit in terms of why engagement matters. The way I look at this is disengagement is a bit of a disease. It's almost like a cancer, and that's, complacency, and that the old ways that we've been working really aren't working anymore. Something is changing out there, and what is that? That's affecting all of us. So if we look at the figures from the current workforce situation, Gallup has come out with that 87% of the global employees are disengaged, which is huge. When we wrote the book Engage, it was based on the U.S. study at that point, and it was that 70% were disengaged. And I thought that was horrible. It meant only 30% of people are, enjoying their work. And then after the book went to print, we found the global study came out, and it was actually way worse. It was 87% that are actually disengaged globally. So really shocking there. And they've been able to really drill down and figure out how much it's actually costing companies in lost productivity. So I have different figures here for different countries just to give you an idea. But it's costing billions in any currency you choose, and it's really having a very negative impact annually for companies. One of the things I love about the UK is that they're pretty advanced on this, and they actually work with it on a strategic level, from a societal level as well, which I think is really fascinating. And you know, they're actively working with it, and how can you make a change and difference here. Gallup also talks about how much disengagement is costing per employee, and they basically have calculated it's about 1/3 of the salary. So if you say, for example, it's 87% that are disengaged, and you multiply that times the number of employees you have times 1/3 of that average salary, you'll figure out pretty easily how much it's costing your company by not actively working with engagement as a business strategy. So when I start showing the numbers to companies and leaders, they start like thinking, oh gosh, what can we do about this? And really, if you start working with engagement strategically, you can solve a lot of the other problems that people often start to focus in on, like say customer service or sales or R&D or any of those types of things. You go to the heart of this, and we'll talk about this as well, that it really can have a positive impact into the organization. So I've pulled out some figures here, and I want you to take a look at this. I asked Maggie specifically, tell me the countries that have signed up for this webinar so I can put them in this. So I have, from the information Maggie told me, pulled out the countries here so you can compare and see how the engagement is rating in your specific country. As I mentioned, when we wrote the book Engage, it was based on the U.S., and I thought that was horrible at that time, but actually the U.S. is a fairly high country on the level, on this scale that they do. I think it's like 6 or 7 in the whole world, something like that. What shocked me, quite honestly, about when the global study came out was how low specifically Western European countries rated. So they are average, mid to high teens. You can see the UK is 17%, Sweden, where I am, is 16%, Ireland as well, 16%. Denmark was the only one that I saw that had above 20, so they're at 21, so go Denmark. And then I was pulling some new countries out yesterday for this webinar, and I saw Netherlands there at 9%. France has been at 9%. The interesting thing, if we look at South Africa, you've got only 9% is engaged there, but they're actively disengaged is actually 45%. That's huge. So, those of you down in South Africa, you have some work to do. And just to clarify here, the difference between disengaged and actively disengaged. Someone who's engaged is like that definition I gave, is someone wholeheartedly involved in, contributing positively to the organization. Someone who's disengaged is actually doing their job description. They're filling their job function. So it's not that they are not doing their jobs. It's that they're not 100% committed, 100% passionate, 100% doing, reaching their full potential. They're coming and they're doing what they need to do, and they go home. So that is what disengaged and actively disengaged is someone who's really kind of having a very negative impact on the organization. They're the complainers. They're the ones that don't deliver anything. They really kind of drag the organization back. So those are the different levels that Gallup looks at when we're looking at engagement. I hope you guys found that interesting. Please do make comments so I can see, a little bit in terms of what you guys are thinking about all this. But, I think it's fascinating to kind of compare. And one last thing here I'll say, the lowest country in the world, does anybody want to throw in a country there to guess? You can throw some countries in there if you want. It's not going to be surprising when you hear it, actually. But basically, it's the country that's the lowest right now has 0% engagement. And obviously, it's quite obvious because they are they're having lots of wars and battles there. So it's Syria, which is kind of a sad thing to say, actually, but hopefully, things can improve there. So all this research is great. I went to my computer. This is actually a screenshot from my computer, and I started to type in Google, my job makes. And you know how it automatically tells you, fills in the searches, the most common searches? Well, this is what came up. My job makes me sick, suicidal, miserable, and angry. And I decided, okay, let me count all those up. So I added all those up, and I came up with 1.2 billion hits for this. If you think we have 8 or 9, no, what are we at, 9 billion people or something like that in the planet, whatever it is, that's a huge percentage of people that aren't happy at work. And I can tell you 100% of the time, and I've done this in lots of different countries, it comes up a little bit differently in different countries, but 100% of the time it's negative answers. So this, to me, shows that we really do have a crisis going on, and we need to really figure out how can we make people feel better at work and what can be positive about work, right? So let me just tell you a little bit in terms of the disruptive changes and the future trends that are affecting all businesses across the board. And this is something we go in quite a bit into detail with our book, Engage. The first one is technology. That's very obvious. We all have our phones like within 3 feet of us max at any point, right? But we're going through an accelerated change right now with technology. And I almost sometimes feel like there's this tidal wave of change through technology coming towards us. And a lot of people may not be aware just how incredibly quickly it's going to affect us. So we're at the knee of the curve of accelerated change. And we used to think change was pretty linear, you know, one step. But it's actually, we're heading into a very accelerated change where things are going to start changing. I read somewhere that it's like in this century, which is, you know, what, the 21st century, we're going to experience like 20,000 years worth of change in this 100 years. And it's like more than we've ever experienced before in our lives. So it's very interesting. I like to stay on top of that. The other trend is dematerialization of industries. This is connected a bit to technology. If you look at Airbnb, for example, it's the largest hotel or it's not a hotel, but largest hospitality provider. They don't own any property, but they are the largest company in the world doing this. Facebook is actually the largest content provider, but they don't own any content. So all these technology-driven companies are destabilizing our whole industries like immediately. So it's very interesting to see. Then we have the demographics. People, first of all, are living longer, so they are working longer often. We also have a mass exodus of the older, you know, the baby boomer generation leaving right now. So there's a mass brain drain that started basically in 2016. It's going to continue for a number of years. And because people are living longer, actually they say by 2020, we should have 5 generations in the workforce, which has never happened either. So kind of interesting because each generation has very different values, very different ways of looking at the world. And I often hear how people are looking to, you know, manage these people and how they struggle with it, especially with the millenniums, which is the 4th major global trend in terms of, you know, this millennium group. And I have borderline millennium daughters, and they informed me that they're more millenniums born than the baby boomers. So it's this huge population coming into the workforce now, and now they're 25%, and I think it's by 2020 they're going to be 50 to up to 75% by 2025 of the 75% of the entire workforce, which is really fascinating. So they have a whole different way of looking at the world, and they're helping us to look at things quite differently. So continuing on, this is the formula that we found from how to build that culture and foundation inside of the organization. And these 5 cultural keys, I'll go into this here shortly in just a second in my next slide, but it's collaboration, creativity, connection, celebration, and contribution. And what we found is that companies can work very strategically with culture using that, but they also need to have this bigger purpose of why they're doing what they're doing. But even that work that we've done with companies, we have found that underlying that, companies need to have trust. There needs to be a really strong level of trust that you can build all of this on top of. So when we're talking a bit about trust in business, there's a couple of books that have come out from Stephen M.R. Covey, and he talks about trust has become the new currency in the global economy. So when you have a high trust organization, the speed to implement things is much faster. So the costs are actually driven down quite a bit because of that. And the vice versa is exactly the same. When you have a low trust organization, it takes a lot longer to get things done. So it actually costs more to work in that. So there's a huge, you know, they've been able to pin it down to the bottom line and to the profitability of an organization based on the level of trust inside of an organization. I'll touch briefly here on the neuroscience of trust. This is also going in a bit to this conversational intelligence work that I've talked about. And what happens on a neurochemical basis and building trust? When you have a management style or an organization that has low trust, what happens in people is that they're actually activating cortisol from their, you know, kind of the reptilian brain, and it kind of takes over. And you've got an individual that's coming from a place of fear. It's a power struggle. People are trying to get as much power as possible. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Sometimes people get addicted to being right, and you often have groupthink, which means that people are afraid to speak up or say anything against kind of, what's happening. And those low trust networks or distrust networks actually decrease the productivity in the organization, and it decreases the engagement. Whereas if you learn how to activate that trust network, which is taking it to the prefrontal cortex part of your brain where oxytocin is produced, when you have a high trust organization or leadership style, you have a lot of transparency, you have good relationships, there's a lot of understanding, it's very open, you're sharing the success, and you're willing to tell the truth. It's a place where it's okay to say, things against what everyone else is doing. So and this again relates to high engagement, high productivity. So they're all really closely related to each other. And it comes down to a lot of the science. I could geek out on this for hours. I won't do that for you guys now, though, I promise. The bottom line of all of this is that there's definitely this heart-brain connection. And what we like to say, it's important to follow your heart, but also take your brain with you and to really kind of tap into what does the heart say, and use both of those, places of thinking and feeling to move forward inside of the organization. So how do you actually create this thriving culture? That's what we like to call it. And it's really it's a culture where people are engaged, they're energized, they are productive, and if you want to use another term, it's really a high performance culture, right? And studies are showing that your motivation and energy actually increases when you're personally continually improving yourself. And this is also true for organizations. So for us, working with engagement, it's a strategy that you use that is an ongoing basis. It's not a one-time shot. It's not something that you just do a program and then you're done and then you've done it and you check it off, or you have a kickoff for the year and okay, that's it, you're done. I hear MDs saying that often to me, and it's just, no, you don't get that. That's not how it works, right? So in our book Engage, we talk about the most amazing companies. And those are companies that are very deliberate in how they're doing business. So I want to define this so we move forward here a little bit. But basically, these companies have a bigger purpose of why they're doing what they're doing. And they lead with that. They're out in the marketplace. They're communicating both internally and externally with that. And they have turned both their employees internally and their customers externally into what we call raving fans. And I like to call them conscious companies because this is how you can build that sustainable business that really focuses in on that triple bottom line of people, planet, and profits. So again, we have these 5 cultural keys, and I'll go through one by one now so we can get more specific on that. So the first one that we found, these are the common traits, the red thread through all these different companies that we looked at. The first one is collaboration, and that's really taking teamwork to the next level, where there's a sense of oftentimes a very family-oriented environment. People understand that by working together for the greater good, it's for the greater good of everybody else. And Southwest Airlines is one of our amazing companies. We love them. We get a lot of inspiration from them. And they have, one of their mottos is basically the front line is the bottom line, and they empower their employees very much so that they can take care of their customers. HCL Technologies, that's a picture there of the book written by Vinit Nair, who was the CEO from 2006 to 2012 and took them through this transformational journey where everyone in the IT industry was downsizing and struggling, and they, grew their company tremendously during that time. And it was this journey where they really put the employees first and then the customers second, and it really paid off quite well for them. So the second cultural key is creativity. And this is really what we talk about when you allow the ideas and the innovation and the creativity to come from within. And there's a sense of continually improving. And here I love to share an example from Puma because, one, everyone knows who Puma is, obviously, but they did this great thing where they started to work with, actually, for a year with PwC to put an economic value to every step of the process in making a product. So if we take a pair of tennis shoes, for example, they actually looked at how much does it cost to have the water that produces the leather and the dyes for the leather and all of that, and they put an economic figure to all of that, and they could make a decision. Is this product, is this pair of tennis shoes okay for the planet, for the environment? And they could actually go back and say, no, we need to do this differently. So then after they started doing this with a few products, they started spreading it out, and basically Now what they do is this environmental P&L, or environmental profit and loss statement, where it shows what kind of an impact they're having. And you get one huge company like that in an industry starting to do something new and creative like that. And it really does have a positive influence on everybody else. So a lot of people or a lot of companies are looking at that and saying, okay, we should be doing that too then. So they're leading by example. The picture there I have on the right is from Mind Valley, which is a small Malaysian company that works with education and a lot of personal growth. And they talk about cultural hacking and open sourcing. And one example there is that they do all their work pretty much online. And so they have created a site where they open source and they tell everybody that this is what has worked well with us, this is what converted well. And they're very open and sharing. And it's almost like they're constantly experimenting on how they can really improve the culture quite a bit. So it's a fun company for us to take examples and inspiration from as well. All right, so the third cultural key is connection. And what we mean by this is how you can have that deeper emotional connection. And that's through the values and through the purpose. And this is where communication falls into play. That picture there with the world, if you don't recognize it, that's actually all the Facebook connections. This came out a couple of years ago, so it's probably a little bit more. But I find it fascinating because our world is getting much smaller for us because we are connecting through technology, right? And it's about creating this internal and external emotional connection that people want to be a part of your organization, of why you're doing what you're doing. And Zappos there is another company that actually gave us a lot of inspiration. And every year they actually write their culture book, and they have all the employees go through an example or write a page of why they love the company, why they love the culture, and it reinforces their behaviors and that they have a positive environment. And it's very open. Like I said, a lot of these companies are very transparent and share and, are willing to share best practices as well. And it really does help other companies gain inspiration. So I have an unofficial survey. I often ask this when I'm speaking in front of a large crowd, and I'll have them raise their hand. But, how many of you wish you had more fun in your life? And you can just, if you want to throw something in the chat box, that's great. But I can tell you, majority of the people always answer yes. Of course, they want more fun in their life. And for some reason, we tend to take ourselves far too seriously, right? And engagement isn't only about having fun, but it is about enjoying things and doing what you love and, being the best version of yourself. And I think somehow or another, we've lost some of that as we've grown up and become adults and responsible, right? So we need to look at that and figure out what can we do to make a more positive difference here on that. So we'll go on to, this leads me into my next cultural key, which is celebration. And it is, definitely about having fun and enjoying work. But it's so much more than just that. When we look at celebration, we're talking about recognition and acknowledgement and focusing in on what's going well. This is where we have, years of research of positive psychology coming in to share with us in terms of, how can you make the organization a good place? So often we focus on our goals and where we need to go next. And we get wrapped into this, a bit of a, what do you call that? A treadmill, basically, of going all the time, that we forget to celebrate those small wins along the way. And by the time we reach that really big goal, we're already focusing in on the next big goal that we have to focus in on. So we don't even take the time to pause and celebrate how far we've come. So this is really an important key, and these amazing companies are really good at this. You see the picture there with Richard Branson, in case you hadn't recognized him. Anytime Virgin Airways opens up a new flight path, often he'll show up and work that flight and be a flight attendant, and it's kind of zany and, kind of fun and crazy. But it has a trickle-down effect. I'll tell you, Virgin has been, one of the companies that has celebration as a really, really strong one. They're good at this. It's so ingrained into their culture in general. It's also probably what I have found the weakest one in most companies out there. So they really just, it's the nose to the grindstone and work hard all the time and not really focus in on relaxing or celebrating. I mentioned here also the 50 most engaged workplaces, because I'd mentioned in the beginning I'm judging on Employee Engagement Awards, and Achievers is a Canadian-based company that actually is working on a global basis to help large enterprise companies work with recognition and to train them on how do you focus in on that. So they do this 50 most engaged workplaces in North America, and I'm fortunate enough to be one of the judges on that, which I really enjoy. So, again, it's just about looking how can you have more celebration at work and in the workplace. And, my title is Chief Joy Bringer, so I'm really big on this one, like, let's bring joy to people's lives and make people smile and laugh and have fun. So I hope you're all okay with that, right? All right, the fifth cultural key here is contribution. And what I mean by contribution is having a positive impact. This is more than just giving money and writing a check at the end of the year. It's having that connection where you're actually giving back and making an impact. And here we take so much inspiration from Tom's shoes. If you haven't heard about them, they're a tiny shoe company. They started as a shoe company, but they started with this one-for-one model where they started with a pair of shoes that if you bought a pair of shoes from them, they'd give a pair of shoes to a child in need. And Blake Makowski, who was the founder, was actually traveling in Argentina and found that kids there didn't have the money to buy shoes and that they were actually getting their feet cut by walking to school and that they would actually get diseases. And it was just like such a simple thing to solve that all they need is a simple pair of shoes. So he came home and said, that's it, I'm going to start this company. And when he went on his first trip to actually put shoes on the kids, it was such an emotional transformation from him that he said, that's it, I'm done. I'm closing out all the other companies I'm involved in. This is my life's work. I'm going to do this. And their model has now gone into, and we talk about, why you're doing what you're doing, right? It doesn't matter so much the product. They've gone into sunglasses, where if you buy a pair of sunglasses, they give a pair of glasses or sight to somebody in need. Then they've next went into coffee. So if you buy a bag of coffee from Tom's, they actually give clean water to a family in a place that they have need for that. And then the most recent one is bags. So if you buy a bag from them, they actually go towards midwives that will help decrease infant mortality rates in developing countries. And they partner now with a lot of different organizations that help them to deliver these. So every product that they come out with has this one-for-one. And it emotionally ties. Remember, we talked about this emotional connection. It emotionally ties the employees or the consumers so much to this company that Tom's doesn't have a huge marketing budget. It's a small company. I think they have like 1,200 employees maybe now, something like that. But they get written up so much, and they have their customers that are raving fans that talk about them and spread the word. So they give us a lot of inspiration, and a lot of companies now are starting to focus in on what can they do to give a positive impact. So all these 5 cultural keys really help to develop the culture in a very strategic basis. The last thing I'm going to mention here in terms of our book Engage is the last part of the book was the 6P model, where if you do this internal work inside of the organization by working with the purpose, the passions, and the people, you will actually get the results externally of having higher productivity, higher profits, and the ability to have a more positive impact. So I often talk about doing this inner work, and we talk about it on an individual level, but also on an organizational level. And when you focus in on those key issues where engagement falls in and culture, you actually take care of a lot of other problems. So it has this ripple effect into organizations that's very, very positive. So it's all about bringing out the best in your company. And we see the line here where we can go, if you have a high level of trust inside of an organization, it builds the confidence. And when you have that confidence, it increases the engagement. And that automatically will lead into high performance. So you see how closely they're related. And I love this image here because it's actually a thumb that's, thumbprint in 2 different directions, but it brings into the heart of the organization. And what I find so fascinating right now is that these big, what used to be considered softer words like culture, trust, purpose, diversity, inclusion, all these different things are being measured, tracked, and researched so that you can have a direct link to the bottom line and the profitability of an organization. So here, I have a quote here from Deloitte's, one of their research that they do is basically that establishing a culture of purpose is so important. What they're saying is it's becoming a business imperative. I don't have the slide here for this, but basically from 2000 to 2015, in those 15 years, 52% of the publicly traded companies went out of business. It was they were merged, they were bankrupt, they got bought out, whatever, but 52% of the companies disappeared. And what they're projecting in the next 10 years, or actually it's 8 years now because it's 2017, they're projecting that 40% of the companies will no longer be in business that are listed today. So the ones that are going to survive are the purpose-driven companies, which is why this work is so, incredibly important. And like I said, whether it's a large organization or whether it's your own company and you're starting up and you're looking how can you build your company, you want to build this into the DNA of the organization. So if it's a new, fairly young startup type company, work with this stuff to build it in so it's just a part of the way that you do business. And if you're in a large organization and it's already kind of been established, then you have to look at it from a different perspective with what kind of activities, behavioral-based activities, can you use to start to anchor this down into the DNA of the company. And I'll share a little bit about that in terms of, why that's so important. The purpose statement of a company is really, really important. This is really kind of creating the essence of the company, but it's touching both the heads and the hearts of people that inspires them, and they are able to, take meaningful action and really live by the values of the whole organization that help in that growth of the business. And it kind of gives a guiding light, a compass or a northern star to drive people forward and taking the business to the next level. And most companies are really good with putting together their vision and their mission and their values. Not so many are good at putting this purpose statement together. It's pretty rare that I see companies that have a purpose statement that really kind of captures the essence of who they are. So we're starting to see this shift from being very profit-driven to switching over to being very purpose-driven. And it's really interesting to see. I don't know if you've heard of this, triple bottom line that I'd mentioned earlier, but really we're starting to see where we have focused in on profits for, decades, right? That's the way business has been run. It's the old way of doing business. It's all about the money and it's all about the profitability of the business. But what we're finding now is that we need a more holistic perspective into building a business. And it's about focusing in on, the planet and the people. And if we look at the planet, that's where you see the CSR, corporate social responsibility factor coming in, where they're really looking in on, what kind of an impact does the business have on the environment and the culture and, the connection to the local communities, whatever it is. Where I see the people, it's like the third leg, that's where engagement falls into. And it's really where leaders of organizations are starting to understand that, gosh, you really have to take care of your people, create an environment where they love to be and be a part of, because that's how the organization is going to thrive. So again, we're switching from focusing on purpose rather than just the profits, because that's what builds the confidence in the business and that's what drives investment as well. And that's where we're really starting to see the shift. So if you have your own company, figure out why are you doing your business. As an entrepreneur, it's interesting because sometimes, the business is an extension of who you are. And I will say this also is kind of just an observation. When I was working in headhunting before, like 90% of my network was all men. Now I'm doing this cultural, organizational, transformational work, and I'd say probably 80% of the people I end up working with are women, which I think is kind of an interesting observation, but it tends to be the women are the caretakers of an organization for some reason. That's just kind of a side note because we're here on the WEConnect. Thought I'd make that connection there. So kind of in starting to sum up everything, and then I'll be happy to take some questions here and love to connect with you all. But we at Evoloshen really believe that great things happen from the inside. So if an egg is broken by an outside force, life ends. But if an egg is broken by an inside force, then life begins. And this is what I talk about when we do the inner work inside of an organization. Because if you go to that heart and soul and kind of the main drivers inside of the organization with the purpose and the passions and the people, you can create amazing things. And I've seen this transformation happen with so many different companies when they start to do this work. It's really fascinating. So, I have a big belief from Albert Einstein that we can't solve the problems in the world from the same level of thinking that created them. And we really need a new mindset. We need to look at a new way of thinking. And this is the work that we do at Evoloshen. It's all about shifting people into looking at things a little bit differently, and how can we really build that sustainable culture and environment that people just love and want to thrive and be a part of. So this is my little dream. love to share this slide because I know when this happens, when I go to my computer and it says my job makes me happy, excited, passionate, or joyful, then I can go to, the Bahamas and retire and I'll be done with my work. But I think I have a long way to go still. Anyway, but that is my dream, that we actually get some positive statements coming up from Google when you do that, because I think at this point, as entrepreneurs and people, in management positions, they tend to be pretty engaged and excited and pretty fulfilled. But if you go down deep into organizations, they don't tend to be that. And I think it's kind of a tragedy. And I think we all, as leaders in businesses, have an obligation and a duty to create an environment where people can really thrive. So I wanted to share with you real quickly here before we open up for questions. If this work sounds exciting to you, if you are interested in going deeper with this, I'd love to invite you to take a look at this, because after we wrote the book Engage, I spent a year speaking all over Sweden and Europe about engagement, why this was so important. And the question that kept coming up was, okay, that's great, we understand why it's important, but how? How do you actually get an organization engaged? And it was an answer that I couldn't give in an hour. I would laugh and I'd say, well, how long do we have? So we ended up developing a certification training where we actually take people that go through this, and companies can send employees to this training where they actually go very deep into how do you work strategically with engagement. This is not an HR initiative. It's something that should be worked on an ongoing basis, and we create experts. So if you have, some employees that love working with culture, this is a great place that you can send them. It's a really in-depth training on how you get an organization engaged. We go into quite a bit about the science. We touch just so briefly right now. It's kind of scratched the surface here on the science behind engagement, and there's a whole lot of neuroscience that goes behind behind engagement and trust. It's a very hands-on training, so that by the time someone is done with this training, they actually have a very concrete plan that they can take back and start to implement using behavioral-based engagement activities. And all of this really helps to increase the performance and the productivity of the organization. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this training is pre-approved from 2 of the largest HR associations in the world. So that's the link that you can go to there to get more information on that if you're interested. It's evolutionacademy.com/join. JOINICES, which is International Cultural Engagement Specialist. And because you spent your time here, I love to give gifts to people, so I hope that you will take advantage of this. If you go to evolution.com, Evolution is, I don't know if people are just listening here. If you don't have the slides, I'll spell it out. It's evoloshen.com/gifts. There you can get some gifts, which basically will get you connected to bring you into, my newsletter and being able to see what types of products and services we offer. But at the gifts, you can get an app that you can work with that will help you feel better during the day and bring joy into your daily basis. I also have an amazing leader series there and some other things. So if you check that out, you can just sign in and get connected to me. So also, there's all my contact information. And, again, I'm ready to take questions for anybody that may have questions. Maggie, maybe you can help me, because I saw some questions coming through, but I wasn't able to read them all because I was focusing here on the slides.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Karin. I have to admit, I'm very much gobsmacked by some of the stats that you shared at the very beginning about the level of engagement, or rather the level of disengagement, and just those stats are crazy. And in fact, one of the questions that had come up during the session was from Colette about the definition of what disengaged means and what they were being asked, and she wondered whether it was something to do with, or is that the disengagement, is that people seeking a better work-life balance? I just wondered what your thoughts were around that, about how the survey had been done and what they'd maybe been asked.
So Gallup does this survey. I don't know how often they actually do it, but it's 12 questions, and they're able to kind of extrapolate all this information from those 12 questions. If you're talking about people that are looking for a work-life balance, I mean, some of those people that might not be fully engaged at work because they're trying to, take time off or have a balance in their family and things like that, they might fall under that category. The disengagement is, like I said, people who are fulfilling their job descriptions, but they're just not, they're showing up to work, but they're not 100% there. And you can have, and the thing that we didn't talk about this either, but engagement or disengagement is very volatile. So one day somebody can be really engaged and then boom, maybe their parents have passed away or their child is sick or something, and then they fall into the disengaged category because they're so focused mentally on, I've got to take care of these things, right? So they're not 100% focused at work. So it's a very volatile thing, which is why you have to work on it on a continual basis.
Yes. Yes, and that was going to be one of my questions. You'd said it's definitely, it's not a one-off session. It's not like a kick-off session in January and you kind of done for the rest of the year. It's very much an ongoing process. Do you have maybe a couple of top tips for some of the women-owned businesses in our networks, which are generally all going to be small, medium-sized enterprises, about 2 or 3 key things that they could consider doing to engage their workforces? And often with SMEs, and certainly from the businesses that I know within WEConnect, their employees are either quite remote, working flexibly and working in different locations, or they've got a small core team. And I just wondered if you had any top tips that you might be able to share around what things they could consider doing.
Well, I'll tell you, for me, I've written an article about this. It's gone a little bit viral, but engagement is a two-way street. So I often hear stories coming out of especially Silicon Valley where people are looking at, creating this environment that people are totally, they're doing the ping pong tables and all these services at the workplace. And it's like, okay, that's great because they're trying to attract the top talent, but they're going overboard. And I think for me, it's a two-way street. So it's really important that you empower the individual. And by that, I mean, as an individual yourself, take ownership of your own engagement and say, what can I do to be more engaged? And once you start to own that, then you can start to have a positive impact because you lead by example to others. So you can lead by example to your team or, your employees or your coworkers or whatever, and showing them, how you can be fully engaged. So that's definitely one tip I can give. And then also another really, really simple thing that you can start to use today is just to start looking at what's going well and focusing in on that. So often we talk about, all the problems that we're having to deal with. And yes, of course, we have problems and challenges, but what else is going well? Because as positive psychology shows, that if you focus on what's going well, your mindset will start to shift and you start to see more good things. So it's like we have these filters in our brain and we train it to look at what we want to look at, right? So focus on what's going well. And then the third thing that's kind of related to that as well that people can easily do is start to focus in on gratitude and appreciation. Recognition for your employees. If someone does a good job, even if it's something really small, show that. And to publicly recognize people with the team is great because it reinforces that behavior and it makes people feel like, oh, I'm seen, I'm mattered, and wow, you really noticed what I did. So thank you for that. Those are 3 super simple things that you can start to work with immediately.
Absolutely, yeah, they're all really good practical pieces of advice. Does anybody who's joined us live, if anyone's got any questions, please do use the chat functionality to share those questions with us. I know that this is a whole big topic, Karin. Aside from your book Engage, are there other resources that participants today could have a look at that you think are worth them if they want to find out more about this, apart from staying in touch with yourself and reading the book, but other resources they could look to?
I'll just mention here, since you bring this up, a lot of the people who've registered are in the UK, and Engage for Success is that organization that's working on a societal level in the UK, and I think they're great. I'm aligned with them, and I just think it's great that that's even a topic on a country level instead of just an organizational level. So they have a lot of great resources there. But, I mean, it's kind of like one of those huge, it's a soup out there when you look at engagement. And I'm doing a series right now on LinkedIn as well, just videos talking about all these different things and going a little bit deeper into them too. So, I think if it's a topic that you're interested in and want to work with, there's just so much information. But trust in what you're drawn to or what you're attracted to, because that means that there's something there for you.
Absolutely. No, please do share the links for them. That would be great. I'd be really happy to pass them on. I've had a question from Colette, following up on your comment about employees feeling empowered, and she's just asking, it's very important that the employees feel empowered to be fully engaged. And maybe that's possibly not going to be possible if employees feel like they don't get a say. And I guess, Colette, you maybe mean in how things are run within the business. Karin, I don't know if you've got any kind of comments on that or anything further down that line around employees actually feeling engaged and empowered.
So that's a really interesting question, because to me, I didn't touch on my personal story, and I won't get into that now, but there's a big reason as to why I do what I do, and it has to do a lot when I'm doing my inspirational speaking about the quality of the questions determine the quality of your life. And oftentimes people give their power away and go into victim mentality. So if you have an employee that feels like, oh, I'm not being heard, how can I be fully engaged? They're giving their power away. So we've got to train people and individuals to say, how can I step into my power and how can I reclaim that power? And it depends on the types of questions. So if someone feels like they don't get a say, well, why is that, and what could they do to change that, and how can they, and obviously, it may be such a huge organization that there is no way that they're going to be able to have an influence and have a huge say, but you'd be surprised at how much small little actions can make a huge impact into a team or an organization. And I believe we all have our own circle of influence that we can, make a difference with, and we have a choice on either to react or respond to things. And that's where the power comes in, because if you react and you just give your power away, then you're going to be feeling very disempowered. Whereas if you say, okay, how can I respond to this situation, or what can I do to learn from this, or how can I make this a better situation, you get different answers in your brain. And that's where you can start to step into your power and really step into thriving as an individual and as an employee. So I think it's a little bit of training that we all need to go through, and it's something we have to be reminded of on a regular basis, even myself, to remember to ask empowering questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Karin. And there's some great comments from Colette about, working in command and control organizations where culture programs frequently fail, and that kind of react first thing, respond is a great approach. So Colette, thanks very much for your questions. Just in the final couple of minutes, does anybody have any other questions using the chat function that they would like to ask Karin? So I've got one more from Emma saying, how do you encourage management to focus on engagement if they are worried about the bottom line? And I'm going to interpret that meaning this is maybe just a nice to have rather than something that's maybe more financially focused. But Karin, at the very beginning you talked about some stats on the costs around around disengagement within your employee base. But yes, so how is there an easy, is there an easy way to get management to be thinking about engagement?
That's such an excellent question. And again, if you show some of these statistics and figures, it gets their attention. And when you can actually show, I have a webinar that I have that shows how do you calculate the cost of disengagement. And it's such an empowering webinar because, and I can share that with you, Maggie, you can share it with people if you want. But it's such a powerful way to get through to these analytical left-brainers that say, no, it's all about the bottom line, it's all about the figures, and what do we need to do? It makes it concrete, and it makes them realize that, okay, working with culture, it's not a fluffy, soft thing. It's connected to very hard figures, and they can start to track and monitor it. And basically, if you can measure it, then they think, okay, then we can do something with it.
Yeah.
So we do have some tools that help to measure the culture based on these 5 cultural keys as well. But I think it's just to get it on the radar and maybe show some of these shocking figures so that it starts to make them realize, gosh, okay, maybe we should look at what could we do? And then you're starting to ask the right kind of questions, like what can we do to take this further?
Absolutely. That would be great. If you do have a webinar that you've already done that we can share, we'd love to pass that on to people so they can look at that in more detail, and indeed any other resources that you can pass on. I can make sure to send them around to everybody. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's not fluffy stuff, but it does have a massive impact on a business and how it runs. And if everybody's much more engaged, then it will be demonstrative in terms of how well things are going within the company as well, and dealing with the ups and downs of running a business too, and being in that kind of environment. Are there any final questions? If not, we will bring the webinar to a close just within the hour. Karin,
I
thank
just,
you
I
so
want
much.
to just
Oh, yeah.
make one more
Sorry.
comment before we wrap it up, but just as an observation is that, 10, 15 years ago, it was always the marketing HR was the softer side of business. It was always the first people to be let go. That's changed now. Those are the right-hand people of the CEO, if it's someone who understands the power of this, because they realize they can't do it without those two areas that really kind of become the caretakers of the culture. So kind of an interesting shift I've seen.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. And I think there's, gosh, we haven't even touched on this in terms of young people in the workforce. I mean, you did touch on that we're soon possibly going to have 5 generations within the workforce, and how that will be different in terms of managing you different age groups and different outlooks on life and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a hugely complex situation that isn't going to go anywhere. Thank you very much for sharing it. I've had a few comments from people to me privately just saying thanks very much for a great session, lots of interesting content, and we'll certainly be following up with you. So Karin, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for dialing in. And for listening through. And I know for those of you who weren't able to join live, but you've been listening back to the recording, thanks very much for listening through to the questions at the end as well. So Karin, thank you very much. We will follow up. We'll send a note around to everybody. Karin's details are there, and she'd be delighted to hear from any of you if you've got any more questions. But Karin, thank you very much, and thanks to all for dialing in today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
it's
everyone.
been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.